brought to you by ABSA, a member of Barclays, in association with Business Leadership South Africa.
Hello and a warm welcome to another episode of NDP, A Plan in Motion. The National Development Plan marks agriculture as a key job creator, proposing that it can create close to 1 million jobs by 2030. On this episode, we're putting agriculture in the spotlight and look at how South Africa can capitalize on true agriculture potential. In studio with me to look at how we can harness the power of agriculture is Dr. Tsakani Ngomane from the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation in the Office of the President, Brienne Van Der Walt, Managing Executive for Agribusiness at Barclays Africa, Peter Staude, Chief Executive of Tongaat Hulett, and joining us from our Cape Town Bureau is Professor Edith Fries, Director General of the Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry. We're also joined by our studio audience who will be participating in this discussion in both halves that we have. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. And I really want us to start off by getting a picture of the current landscape of agriculture in South Africa. Peter, let's start off with you.
Look, I think it is still one of the most key social issues we face in the country. And it's one of those topics which doesn't get enough airtime, by the way. And the simplest way that I always say that we need to give it airtime is if you think about our population of some 50 million people, maybe 20 million of them live in a rural context. And very often when you read all our conversations that we have in the country, it's about the 30 million people, not about the 20 million people who live in a rural context. And then when you look into the rural context, some of the poorest of the poor, by the way, live in that rural area. If you then look at what industries, what businesses are there to supply them hope for the future, agriculture is centre to that conversation. So I'm very pleased we're having this session here today. And I can't overemphasize, many of us should recognize the rural dynamics and how it will impact eventually on the whole country if you don't get it right.
Brienne, let's come to you on the advancements that we've made in agriculture in South Africa and the current status.
I think the South African agricultural sector is extremely well developed, very competitive on a global scale. In many of the subsectors, we punch far above our weight. Citrus, some of the tree nuts, grapes, without necessarily the support that commercial farmers would get in many of the other parts of the world. But to Peter's point, if you look at land ownership in South Africa, there's a historic grievance, a valid one, that needs to be addressed. And really the question is how we're going to take this path forward while protecting this substantial asset that we have around agriculture in South Africa. So how do we do it viably and sustainably without impacting our food production?
Dr. Tsakani, maybe from your perspective as well, you've had to wear many hats and as an observer.
Actually, this whole discussion around agriculture and rural development is very close to my heart as a South African coming from a rural context. The experiences of rural communities and participants in the agricultural sector, particularly the smallholder farmers, ring very much close to my heart. The experiences we've had over the past 21 years or so is of a sector that has been struggling to deal with the transformation challenges. How do we build on what Brian has just indicated of a successful commercial agriculture that is more export-oriented without protecting that sector, but also encouraging new entrants into that space type deal, and that has been a challenge. You think of support services, you think of access to land, you think of access to markets, financial services. It's been a challenge. Hence the proposals in the NDP. I hope everyone has gone through the NDP document. It presents a vision that, embraced by all society in South Africa, we could then deal with issues of transformation, dealing with the difficult challenges of protecting the commercial sector, whilst at the same time dealing with the majority that Peter was referring to in the rural sector that looks at agriculture as a source of livelihood.
Mm-hmm. Director General, I'd like to come to you in Cape Town to give us more perspective. We've heard the sentiments being shared by your colleagues here in Johannesburg regarding the rural dynamics as well as the new legislation that is being proposed. And let's maybe tackle the elephant in the room, especially when it comes to land reforms. Are we doing this efficiently and appropriately in order to be able to avoid any unforeseen circumstances that might make South Africa uncompetitive in the agricultural landscape?
Firstly, I agree with the sentiments of my colleagues that agriculture is the catalyst for economic growth, for food security, and for job creation. The fact is that of our 122 million hectares of land, 13% is arable and around 3% is highly productive agricultural land. And if we want to enable agriculture to come to its full potential as this engine for job creation and economic growth, we have to put all of the productive land, all the land that is available, into production.
Maybe if we can take it further there and speak about that productivity, because it almost seems as though there's been an outcry from some of the farmers who say we are the ones who are able to deal with this land. Can we keep it despite the regulations and the proposed changes in regulation which stipulate that there are limitations on the size of the property that they can own and the amount of properties that farmers can own? Are you liaising with business in order to understand where they're coming from? And if so, what has been the feedback?
Those are policy proposals that are that is led by the Department of Rural Development and Land Reform, and there is a process of discussion underway. There are policy proposals. They have not as such been implemented, and a few weeks back the Minister of Land Reform and Rural Development hosted a summit in that regard. We also have proposals on the table from commercial farmers where they have come forward with proposals and said, this is how we can do it. This is my proposal. There are several that are on the table.
I'd like to get sentiments now, coming back to the Johannesburg studios. Peter, you're one of those commercial farmers. I want to get your perspective on some of the proposals that you and your colleagues have made, and Tsakani, to come to you on the level of transformation and if it's taking place at the right pace. Peter, your sentiments first?
Because I think firstly, we're probably more an agri-processor than a farmer ourselves, even though we farm quite substantial land in Southern Africa. I think the first comment I want to make is, we ourselves don't see that conflict between commercial farmers and the plight of communal farmers. They're just different topics, and they've got different dynamics, and you mustn't mix them up, because they've got different needs and different dynamics how to make them successful. We've got no doubt in our mind that you're not going to develop in Africa just with big commercial farms. Neither are you going to have a vibrant agri-processing sector if you just got communal farmers. And we're actually in action on the topic. So I'll give you an example. The sugar industry in KZN as an industry is well advanced on the topic. So we operate, let's say, in Yama Trustland area. There's 2.6 million hectares there, by the way, that's poorly used. That's how much there is. In the last 4 years, with the help of government, by the way, because you have to have help in the process, we've established some 30,000 hectares as a company alone for community farmers under cane. But when we do it, you've got to look at this like a unique topic. You don't treat a 4x4 like a Ferrari itself, and you've got to tune into what those dynamics are, and they're not simple. We've got a very vibrant commercial sector suppliers. We're one of the bigger buyers of maize, and later I'll talk a little bit of some of the agri-processing possibilities there are for South Africa from maize. Many people, for example, don't realize when you've got your powdered coffee cream, 77% by volume is maize. Are you with me? And that competitive maize out of South Africa gives us a springboard for the whole African market, as an example. So you've got these two topics. both topics have got their own dynamics. Are you with me? I'm very encouraged by the government's approach at the moment to also take this topic and make it decentralized. So the whole concept of district land committees or of agri parks recognizes that the Western Cape doesn't look the same as Northern KZN. Neither does Northern KZN look the same as the middle of the Free State, if you want to call it that way. So that's the one comment I would want to make at this particular point.
Tsakani, to get your views on the level of transformation and especially on the back of Peter's sentiments here that we're dealing with oranges and apples and some bananas in the mix too.
That's a very interesting observation from commercial agriculture. I'm fascinated by the notion of treating one separate from the other. However, what the NDP tells us is that both categories of farmers need to find a middle ground. That's what the notion of transformation is all about. Okay. You want to ensure the smallholder or subsistence farming group succeeds in terms of meeting their fundamental requirements: household food security, access to food, availability to food. But you also want to ensure that they enter into the commercial space over time. Okay. So what the NDP says is that we need to do that in a manner that does not distort existing markets. We recognize the contribution of the commercial sector. It is primarily because of the active participation, successful production of the 35,000 or so commercial farmers that are shrinking, by the way. A few years back they were at 40,000, now estimates put that number to 35,000. Okay. We owe to that group the fact that South Africa has continued to be a food secure nation. The Food and Agriculture Organization has recognized that we even met the Millennium Development Goals, only 2 countries in Africa. Okay. However, the reality is we need to increase the number of, commercial producers. How do you do that without growing a significant cohort of smallholder participants into the commercial sector? I think that is where we're missing each other. The transformation is not in the interest of just one sector. It's in the interest of the country for us to continuously maintain the national food security status. Yeah. We need to ensure household food security is satisfied, but we channel this progressive, successful smallholder farmers into the commercial sector. There are proposals in the NDP around linking that group to new markets, expanding irrigation, agriculture. There are opportunities there, building on what Peter has raised, focusing on areas of differential opportunity. Various regions has greater potential to contribute towards employment and jobs and all that. So it's a question of us finding each other and engaging in platforms like this.
Peter, you want to follow up on that?
I want to just say, and we know each other well, by the way, so we've often spoken about the topic too.
Yes.
But essentially, when we use the word transformation, we've also got to be clear what you're talking about sometimes in transformation. So if you're talking transformational racial dynamics or gender dynamics, there are many black people and there are many women and black women in South Africa that really aspire to become big commercial farmers. And if they're ready, they're qualifying out of universities for the last 20 years. Are you with me? You've got to open up the pathway for people like that to become commercial farmers. And so from the transformation conversation, that's the commercial one. But what you do have, and that's what we learned the hard way ourselves. We've been in this topic for many, many years, very practically. Our ex-chairman, J.B. Magwaza, is now retired at 72, worked on the topic in the 80s in KZN. Just to put it in perspective, what level of person we used and what it is. But what we found, and we do it even in countries like Mozambique, where we went in after the war, what we found is that if somebody lives in a rural context, and they're farming with a bit of cattle, a bit of vegetables, a bit of that, there are some of them that can make easily the flip to a more major scale farmer, but the huge majority of them can't. But you can't give up on those people in the rural areas. So now you've got to exercise your mind on the topic. So like in sugarcane farming, for example, you know, in the early days we ignored that when you do sugarcane farming up front, you've got to do a 10-year investment. Now, if you're struggling to make a livelihood, you know, to organize yourself to do a 10-year investment is a huge step. So then you say, well, we're the partner because we benefit from the social change as an organization and being part of the social terrain. So we started to go into the space that we helped them to do the investment. And once the investment is done, you know, on a different path. You know.
Brienne, when we take a look at things from your side of the picture.
Sure. So I think, you know, we need to really cover the topic of transformation properly before we talk about NDP, because the two needs to be aligned. If we do transformation one way, or perhaps not the right way, we're not going to end up where we want with the NDP. And if you look at where we are today with transformation, it's probably deemed a limited success, okay, for various reasons. Some successes are masked. You know, like if you look under the land claims, you had a choice of financial or land restitution, and I think people forget about the financial restitution, which was a big part of the budget that was spent. But anyway, I think government came to the point where they said, look, on our own we cannot make this work. We need all partners across the agri value chain, commercial farmers, small-scale farmers, agro-processors, banks, to play a role. I can tell you from traveling through the country, there is no lack of willingness to make transformation work in this country. From farmers, small farmers, organized agriculture, banks, we all support it. We made, from a banking perspective, we sat together with the other big commercial banks under the BASA umbrella, the Banking Association of South Africa, together with the Agribusiness Chamber. So that's where big agro-processors would sit, co-ops, mechanization, seed fertilizer companies. And we made a proposal to government around transformation, which really centers around linking commercial agriculture with financing institutions and small-scale farmers and beneficiaries to make it work. And what we're saying is, what do you want from transformation? It must be viable and sustainable. Okay, so and banks' credit processes can provide that to a large extent. We, for example, can give government comfort that we won't finance transformation projects where the land prices are inflated. We just don't finance overinflated assets. We know what assets are worth. We finance viable projects. We have long institutional memories about what works and what doesn't work in agriculture, so we can pick projects that's going to be viable. And like I said, the commercial farmers, there's absolutely no lack of willingness. There's a large number of projects already done. Like people didn't, they're not just waking up now. You know, stuff that's been happening for 10 years. The farm equity schemes, that's all worked very well. So I think all that the private sector wants is a firm and clear framework within which transformation can take place. The rules of the game shouldn't change the whole time. So once we have that, once there's a very clear and firm framework, and the resources that will enable this transformation is available and sustainable, then we can walk the road, and there is no lack of willingness. Farmers are raring to go around transformation. They just want clear and firm rules.
This is a good point for us to bring Edith into the conversation. Indeed, Edith, we actually want to hear your voice and your perspective, not only on transformation, but also the workings. We heard Brienne just mention that we need clear-cut policies that aren't going to alter all the time. Maybe if you can give us your response with regard to this.
In this conversation, I'm speaking as the Director General of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries. And the colleagues are absolutely clear. The statistics are there, and it says to us that 95% of the food is produced by commercial farmers. And if we look at the food security or the food demand, we will have to produce 40% more food to meet the population growth, projected population growth by 2030, and 70% more food to feed the 9.1 billion people that will be in the world by 2050, 2,000 of which will be in Africa. So just giving those statistics, it means we have to do things differently. It cannot be, and the kinds of policy decisions and the interventions we make today will determine where we will be tomorrow. And so the colleagues around the table will know that what we have put on the table is an agriculture policy action plan. We've heard in the State of the Nation, for example, priority number 1, which the President outlined as the 9-point plan to grow the economy, is the revitalization of the agriculture and agro-processing value chain. We have taken some of the high-value commodities as listed in the National Development Plan that says these are the winners that are the labor-intensive commodities and for which there is a demand which is suitable to our soil type. And so work has been done in that regard. And organized agriculture, whether it is the commodity groups and farmer groups, have been in the rooms with us and in planning forums to make decisions about how we will make that happen. So I believe that the policy direction has been set. The next 5 years is seen as the first 5 years of implementing the NDP, and we have put some of those policies on the table. It is indisputable. There's no argument about the importance of agriculture to our economy, but it has to be more inclusive. And I agree with the sentiments colleagues have expressed in the Johannesburg studio. It isn't one group or the other. We'll have to take on board the smallholders. If you take the livestock industry, I think it's a 5.9 billion industry, but 44% of the livestock is in the hands of communal farmers. And so therein lies the opportunity of doing things differently.
Before we actually get questions from the floor, because I see a few people taking notes, I actually want to come back to you, Edith, and actually ask you if not only are the policies working, but the partnerships, are they taking place, especially given the contribution that agriculture does give to South Africa's gross domestic product. I understand it stands at about 3%, but the South African economy is not at its best at the moment. We're expecting economic growth of around 2%. We've got challenges from Eskom. Our manufacturing sector isn't picking up, which is obviously an ancillary sector which helps support the agricultural division. Do we need to review any of this? And I'll come back to the other panelists to get their perspective on this as well. Or are things working as they are? And do we need to stick to what's currently in place?
What the figure of a 2.7% contribution to GDP masks is that the real trade of agriculture, forestry and fisheries has increased progressively over the last number of years. And what we also should not exclude from the debate is the growth in agro-processing, which contributes about 12.7% to GDP. And agro-processing is not possible without agricultural production. So there has been growth in the sector. And there are partnerships. I mean, we just a dairy chain that has benefited from government's support, and who've come forward and said, we want further support. If we are able, we want to engage smallholders, producers in 2 provinces, I think it's KZN and Free State, so that we can increase the production of dairy products by 660,000 litres. And so the proposals are there, and because they have interpreted the policies we have put on the table and have come with a concrete proposal which we will fund.
We're going to a short ad break. More on unlocking South Africa's agriculture sector when we return. Welcome back. You're watching NDP, A Plan in Motion, where we're discussing the true potential of South Africa's agriculture sector. My panelists today include Dr. Tsakani Ngomane from the Office of the President, Brienne Van Der Walt from Barclays Africa, Peter Staude of Tongaat Hulett, and joining us from our bureau in Cape Town is Professor Edith Fries from the Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry. So, Brienne, from your perspective?
At Barclays, we support the NDP plan, and what it centers on around agriculture is to take South Africa to a very high-value agricultural country by 2030. But before we can talk about adding 1 million jobs, we need to acknowledge a single global truth in agriculture, and that is that agriculture is actually reducing labor. Okay, so and that's an outcome of mechanization, of automation, of precision farming. And we cannot shield ourselves from it, because basically you will become uncompetitive. So it will be, you will produce commodities, food that will be very expensive and no one wants to buy it. So the question then is, how do we sort of buck this trend? So the global trend is a decline in employment in agriculture, yet the NDP says we want to add 1 million jobs. And there's a couple of points that the NDP touch on, and some that maybe should be added to it. The first one is where it says we need to move more land into irrigation. So irrigation is typically your more labor-heavy side of the agricultural commodity perspective, or the spectrum. So we need to develop dams, we need to develop canals, other irrigation infrastructure. The second point, also touched upon in the NDP, is where we have irrigation, to move towards very labor-intensive, high-value agriculture. So that would be citrus, trees, vegetables, grapes, for example. And we're really already quite strong in some of those areas. The third one, and maybe that's not touched upon in the NDP, is what's our competitive, our niche advantages on the global market? Think of the game industry. If you think of the big five, you can only see them in Africa in its natural habitat. And South Africa, within Africa, has got a very definite advantage, competitive advantage when it comes to the game industry. We've got a fully developed game supply chain, luxury lodges, those kind of things. It uses marginal land, so that industry still has a long way to go. Think of citrus. We're probably the 15th, 16th biggest citrus producer in the world, with the biggest exporter of citrus globally. In 2013, we became the biggest macadamia nut producer in the world. We overtook Australia. If you can't beat them in cricket, let's beat them with the macadamia
Something.
And so pick your competitive niches. The fourth thing is really the clarity. So in other words, the policy clarity. How do we get to 2030? We need to have a very crystal clear a framework of how we want to do transformation in that process. Then we need to bring unproductive land, communal land, failed transformation projects, we need to bring that back into the productive space. Okay, so if you talk to the grain industry, for example, they will tell you that we've lost 1 million tons of maize production in Mpumalanga due to the mining industry. Okay, and they will also tell you that the Eastern Cape has got the potential to bring back that 1 million tons of maize, but that's in communal lands. So how do we bring commercial actors and the people with access to land, that is the communities, together to make this happen? So that's really a key thing. And then the last thing is we need the South African government to become champions of South African agriculture on the global market. So trade wars, like if you go to the WTO, only government officials can negotiate there. And that's really how the trade wars are going to heat up. It's going to pick up. Governments from all around the world are using unfair trade practices that you can only settle at the WTO, to stop imports or to promote their own exports. So we need real negotiation skills at government level to go and champion South African agriculture on the global platform. Our Department of Agriculture must go out there and sign preferential trade agreements. Like the agriculture of tomorrow. Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma said a couple of months ago at the Africa Leadership Forum, if you look at the youth of today, who's fully connected to social networks and to the information network. If we think that the agricultural potential of tomorrow is going to be unlocked by someone with a cell phone stuck to one ear and a hoe in the other hand, doing hard labor on a 2-hectare plot, we've got it missing. We really we need to look at this, and that links back to the skills development and how do we get the youth of today involved in agriculture.
You mentioned something so important there, is that South Africa is at a competitive advantage with regard to many different elements. Peter, I'd like to bring you in here because your operations are in a variety of geographical locations on the rest of the continent, where Barclays Africa also has offices. Are there weak points and even opportunities that we need to be learning from our counterparts on the rest of the continent?
Look, I think firstly, South Africa and agri-processing, we're in a unique position compared to the rest of Africa. So we've got our challenges, but the rest of Africa's got sometimes deeper and different challenges. What I would like to add, though, is we've got the National Development Plan as a 2030 vision. And it is actually a big change process that's in that vision. So if you look at what we describe where we want to be in 2030 and where we are today, that's not the same place. Okay, now in any change process, there are two sort of dominant mentalities in change processes. And I've led change process very often in my years. You can see the grayness in my hair today. There's a tendency to gravitate to all the obstacles. Are you with me? It's a tendency. And then you suddenly get fearful whether you can achieve your objective. The counter to gravitating to your obstacles, by the way, is to tell you success stories. Okay, now, many of us in South Africa can tell some great success stories. Whether that's a success story in rural KZN, we ourselves in the last 4 years put 30,000 hectares in communal trust land under sugarcane with the help of the government. Those are 6,000 jobs directly conservative. That's just by itself. So these success stories, and I'll give you another one. Coffee creamers, as I said before, as powdered coffee creamers. We've got such a competitive advantage in South Africa because we've got most years, other than the years when we've got a drought, we've got a very competitive maize industry, by the way. And if you take a maize industry, 77% by volume in a coffee creamer is maize. And in the middle, we are the only producer in the whole of Africa. There are no big plants that can produce the product. We've got it here. It's a market with unlimited potential. And then customers of ours and ourselves are buying into the NDP in the future because we're investing. So we together with our customers just invested now 280 million into coffee creamer production. So there are those success stories around. When you pull them all out, by the way, they're counter to all the, the obstacles, the negatives, all the dynamics. The other area I want to touch on is we have to recognize that in the rest of Africa often governments haven't got much of a fiscus. If I go to Zim, as I've done to the government, and I say, I'm developing here 16,000 hectares for small-scale farmers, help me. I won't ask because I know they can't even, where they are economically. But in South Africa, is the question, do you support the agri-processing industry and where do you support it? And I think that topic will still evolve quite substantially in the years to come. When you look at the European strategy, for example, just give you an example. The other day I was sitting with the Director General of EU from Brussels in Europe. What he's giving every person that's got a hectare of farmland, if I multiply all our farming by that number, it's more than our profit. And it's just having it. But in our particular case, probably the money's got to flow towards the people that are in that million jobs we want to create, and that 700,000 that's in the communal areas. And often it has to flow to some infrastructure, into those areas at the moment rather than the other area. But these things are opening up. The other day we were talking about water and irrigation. A big part of the National Development Plan is to have more land and irrigation.
Exactly.
I myself was embarrassed in the Matakula River, which is close to one of our sugar mills. People years ago already did a project for 500 million rand, by the way, investment there. You can put a dam in place there where the water at the moment is flowing into the sea, and you can have another 8,000 hectares under irrigation, and you can provide the local community with water. Now, we talked then, because that's what the National Development Plan is all about. I tell you, on the Premier of KZN shortlist that particular dam to secure the 500 million for this investment. So, and that's where the momentum is starting to come place. That's how we overcome obstacles, and that's how we'll achieve our objective in the National Development Plan.
Exactly. I want to go to the Director General in Cape Town to get her perspective as well as response to the sentiments mentioned by Brienne a moment ago with regard to negotiations on a global scale, and clarity from Peter with regard to allowing the NDP to basically prove its mandate. And that's before we cross to the floor to get questions. But Director General, your response to both the issues that were raised by Brienne and Peter?
There were several issues raised. Let me respond to the issue of trade, and just to give assurance that we understand that mandate, that it is our responsibility to open up those markets, to get into, I think very often we do that, we can't do that alone, we do that with business as well, but ultimately the agreements around the phytosanitary requirements has to be done government to government. As we speak, some of my colleagues are in Washington, D.C. with the Minister of Trade and Industry, where we are defending our poultry industry. And it's a very, very difficult process, but that is what we are dealing with right now. And I think it's one of the areas opening up new markets that we take quite seriously and that we've had a fair degree of success with. In last year, December, my minister signed a protocol with China, opening up the market for South African maize and apples to China. There was also comment made about land, the alienation of productive land, agricultural land to mining. And just to give assurance that there is, that's an area that we really will give policy certainty on very shortly. I mean, there is legislation on the table, but clearly there are gaps in that. And what we're putting on the table is a bill called the Protection of and Development of Agricultural Land, because we believe that small reservoir of gold that we have in terms of arable land, it needs to be designated and it needs to be protected. Maybe the last one, there were comments about bringing in youth as well. I think to young farmers, there are examples of successful youth farmers. I think it was Peter or somebody who mentioned, once they have exposed young people to the possibilities of primary agriculture, young people become excited about it. And I think that something that we can do is to showcase those best practices of the young people who are making a very good job. And once we begin to show that, I believe that more and more people will turn to the enormous job opportunities in the agriculture value chain.
Thank you so much for your sentiments that you've shared there, Director General. I will take the first two questions and then come back to the gentleman on the to my far left.
Hi, my name is Sichawa Muletsani. I represent a company called Spilled Water Holdings. I think I'd like to make one or two comments. We've been doing development farming for the last 6 to 8 years in South Africa. And on the ground, a lot of what is being said by industry, for me, is not necessarily coming through. I believe government has done an amazing job to try and assist and promote transformation. But currently, I would say that industry needs to do a lot more. We cannot depend on government to be the one that is footing the bill when industry has been enjoying the fund and the industry for so long. I believe they need to start putting some hands into it as well. You have CSI spends that could be used to be running mentorship programs. You have Department of Agri or Agri CETA that is sitting with huge amounts of money that are not being used because we don't have places to place these people. And the only people that have the ability to transfer these skills is the commercial sector, across the board, across grain, whether it's tomatoes or whatever it is that they're farming. We're doing projects in the Eastern Cape, similar to what the gentleman is speaking of. We've been doing projects across the country, turning around projects that were land redistribution programs and land reform projects under various government programs to help turn these projects around. What we're not finding is that the commercial industries are not there to handhold. Instead, they're coming in and they're taking over the land and leasing it from the farmers and leaving them with nothing in terms of skills, in terms of markets. The biggest problem is if you give somebody land and you tell them to go farm it, great, we can help them. We can give them seeds, we can do them mechanization and let them farm. If they do not have markets, it's just as good as nothing. So what I believe is a problem in terms of this so-called transformation from the commercial side, as you can hear, I'm not too chuffed with it, is that the reality is the commercial side of things is not turning around. What government is doing is brilliant, but commercially, we don't see any of the commercial people willing to give up some of their off-takes. You're in essential oils. Everywhere, everybody's got a iron fist on these off-takes. Without you allowing people access to these markets, we cannot grow this industry, nor can we be able to increase the skill sets that's there. So we do have success stories in the Eastern Cape. We did a pilot project that was funded by the Dutch government and our South African government in some of these areas in the Free State and in the Eastern Cape of about 1,500 hectares. We called it Moving South Africa Forward on Biomass. We were able to implement a roundtable of sustainable business protocols that allowed our farmers to be able to replant the following year and continue. However, we had to find off-takes of our own. Our commercial sector was not willing because it doesn't fit, in my mind, with where they would like to see us go as a black farming industry. So I'm sorry to throw a cat amongst the pigeons, but
we appreciate your sentiments. Unfortunately, we're short on time. We will get a response from both government as well as commercial representatives here with regard to your commentary. We've got time for one short question and quick commentary again there from Massimo at the back.
Thanks a lot. I'm Ravi Pillai from Nestle, Corporate Affairs Director. My question is in general maybe to the colleagues from government and private sector as well, of course, on developing a better way of collaboration with multi-stakeholders. You know, as a company involved in the agro-processing sector, I can just think off the top of my head that there are 4 projects awaiting and ready for the next phase of implementation. Of course, as a private sector company, we're fully supportive of the NDP. It's imperative that we support it for the long-term sustainability of the country and of our company as well. So in the agricultural sector, what we're finding is just the coordination elements between the different government departments to make things move faster. We've got a project in the chicory industry with working very closely with the DTI, but it's poised to go to the next level to start displacing agriculture at the moment. So maybe we could use that as a test case for the NDP. Thanks.
Mr. Pillai, thank you so much for your commentary there. Very quickly to Mr. De Luca, closing commentary as an outsider looking in.
Thank you very much. Yes, my name is Massimo De Luca. I work here for the European Union. I'm the head of trade and economics. Just briefly to say, drawing what the Director General just said, also what we heard from the panel, global markets are very key. The good news, I think, for South Africa and for the European Union is we just concluded the negotiation opening up more opportunities in terms of exports into the European Union in a vast range of products ranging from sugar to canned fruits to wine. And I think that even smaller growers and farmers, they shouldn't be put off by some negative reports which can come up from time to time about the hurdles in reaching out to export markets. The export figures from last year into the European Union have grown up dramatically, while the exports from the European Union have not done so well. So we really, agriculture is also helping South Africa to narrow the current account deficits. So that's my positive messages. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your observations. If you could give us a quick 30-second response to that, Director General, and your closing views with regard to the NDP and its involvement in agriculture.
There are examples of success stories on land reform In fact, like the colleague was saying, we also did some research, and in the Western Cape it was found that 67% of the land reform farms were in fact successful, and so we also have to ask why the others were not. I do want to put the issue on the table of local markets. There's a huge local market, because for us it's about finding the balance between growing agricultural trade and its contribution to GDP and the availability of safe and nutritious, affordable food for our communities. And so there are local markets, I mean the food that is bought by schools, prisons, hospitals, the revitalization of local fresh fruit markets, etc. All of those become opportunities. And in terms of the proposals that the colleagues have from Nestle on the table, we are ready to look at that together. We're in the same room, and we appreciate the difficulties that there often is when people bring proposals and you've got to deal with a fragmented government. If you put it before either one of us, we will consider it and give you an answer in the shortest possible time.
Director General, thank you so much for your sentiments. Peter, response not only to commercial involvement and partnership, but also with regard to new avenues for collaboration.
Look, I actually agree with him, but I want to put it in some sort of context here. So we're busy with a very big change process here if we want to achieve our goals, which we want to achieve in the National Development Plan in this sector. As I said up front, it is imperative, it's one of the imperative goals, because 20 million people live in a rural context out of 50 million people itself. Obviously, there are always, like in any change process, a lot of parties involved. Normally, people say, well, I buy in the sentiment of the goal. It's quite easy to say that, by the way. And then very often people can say, I'm doing something. The question in change process always has to be, are you doing the appropriate amount of things? Are you putting enough resources? Are you putting in enough effort in that process? My own view, by the way, still is too, that business generally in South Africa doesn't understand enough in terms of all our social issues, how big a one this one is, and how many businesses in a way touch on this topic. And one day they might be in a trucking business, but if we don't solve this social issue in South Africa, one day they might not have a trucking business. Remember, Tongaat Hulett is the biggest employer in Zimbabwe, and I've been involved there for 30 years, so I've learned some processes itself. So like in any of these processes, then if you're in business, you know, some people are the leaders, some are the laggers. When you're a leader, you shouldn't be just proud you're leading. You should be thinking, how do you motivate the laggers to pull a bit more finger? In all these processes, by the way, and I said it earlier during the tea break, there's also a sentiment, because human beings are much more emotional than we give them credit for. People drive on emotions, by the way, so you have to get the sentiment right. So you've got to, if you're now like an emerging farmer, you're trying to break into the market, are you with me? You're trying to find a way. You can't now treat that topic as you treat somebody that's been farming for 2 generations, or somebody that's in that space with a value chain for 3 generations. You've got to open up your mind, what are the unique dynamics of that situation, and do something extra. So I agree with your sentiment. We've got to work harder as a commercial sector to open up for people to make more progress.
I think you and Mr. Moletsane will have a meeting after this episode today. Yes. Very quickly, in 30 seconds, your closing comments as well as Tsakani and your response.
Mr. Moletsane, seeing that I finance many of these commercial players, there's many commercial farmers who have very complex value-add systems, you know, pack houses, cold logistics, marketing channels into the retail space. And they are obviously under pressure by the retail chains to have the appropriate BE level scoring. So many of them say they'd rather increase production by not by acquiring more land, but by linking into you know, emerging farmers who can give them that produce. And remember, they developed this infrastructure not in 1 generation. This is 2-3 generations of infrastructure development. I'd be happy to talk offline and take you to those clients.
Fantastic. Closing commentary, Tsakani, from you.
I think what is required for the sector is for all of us collectively to work towards this, what others call a big push for change in the sector. I agree that there's goodwill from commercial agriculture, but that is not enough in view of the legacy of agriculture in the country. I'll use as an example the poultry industry. The poultry industry right now, government is negotiating in AGOA favorable conditions for that sector. But there are only 4 or 5 players. They control the seed, they control the fertilizer, they control the hatcheries, they control everything. How then do you get smallholders engaging or breaking into that industry? So you have government doing this effort on one side, and the commercial sector not transforming at a fast enough pace. So what is required is empathy, compassion. Let's all participate in the district land committees. Make our own contribution. Government is contributing 50%. What is our contribution in terms of making land available, in terms of developing capacity, skills, and all that? And we'll get incentives, BEE, triple BEE points, and all that. So it's all in the interest of the country. Agriculture is the core, is the future.
Tsakani, thank you so much. On that note, Mr. Van Der Walt, you heard the incentives have been mentioned once more. Unfortunately, that's where we have to leave this discussion for today. A big thank you once more to my panelists for today. Dr. Tsakani Ngomane from the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation in the Office of the President, Brienne Van Der Walt, Managing Executive of Agribusiness at Barclays Africa, Peter Staude, the Chief Executive of Tongaat Hulett, and Professor Edith Fries, Director General of the Department Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestries, joining us from our Cape Town Bureau. Once more, a big thank you naturally goes out to our audience for participating today and posing their questions. Until next time, it's goodbye for now.